The first warning did not come from Earth. It came from the stars disappearing. One by one, the invasion fleet watch navigation markers blink out across the solar system as if some invisible hand were extinguishing entire constellations. Long-range guidance beacons vanish first. Then deep space relay points stop responding. Finally, even the emergency gravitational anchors placed near Jupiter went dark, leaving hundreds of alien warships drifting inside a silence so complete it felt unnatural. Supreme Fleet Marshal Karath stood motionless on the bridge of the Imperial flagship Dominion Spear, staring at tactical projections that no longer made sense. 3 minutes earlier, humanity had been trapped. 3 minutes earlier, Earth had been surrounded by the most powerful armada ever assembled by the Veydran Hegemony. 12 Titan carriers, 400 assault cruisers, and enough orbital firepower to erase every human city before sunrise across the Atlantic. 3 minutes earlier, this operation had been a formality. Now his navigators could not even plot a route out of the system. "That is impossible," one of the officers whispered. Karath agreed. The Veydran did not lose navigation. Their empire controlled 6,000 systems. Their star maps were layered across centuries of expansion and conquest. Entire species had surrendered simply because the hegemony could appear anywhere without warning. Yet now every route beyond Earth's orbit ended in static. No coordinates, no jump solutions, no confirmed exits. It was as though the solar system itself had folded shut behind them. "Restore the network," Karath ordered coldly. The bridge erupted into motion. Technicians pushed commands through quantum relays. Backup systems activated. Emergency scans flooded nearby space, searching for damaged satellites or hidden interference fields. Nothing appeared. No jamming source. No attack signatures. No enemy ships. Only emptiness. Then every screen aboard the fleet changed simultaneously. Not hacked gradually. Not overridden system by system. Changed. The tactical displays vanished. Navigation grids disappeared. Weapons diagnostics blinked out mid-cycle. Even the armor command consoles embedded directly into the flagship's core systems went black. A single line of white text appeared across thousands of screens. "You are already inside the grave." Silence swallowed the bridge. Not fear. Not yet. The kind of silence that happens when reality stops behaving correctly. Karath felt irritation more than concern. Psychological warfare. Primitive species often attempted symbolic resistance when extinction became unavoidable. Some transmitted threats. Others begged. A few tried religious broadcasts or emotional pleas. But humans had done none of that. No surrender request had come from Earth. No military challenge. No demands. Only that sentence. One of the junior officers laughed nervously. A bluff. Karath almost agreed. Then the fleet's outer sentries vanished. Not destroyed. Vanished. 32 patrol craft stationed near the edge of lunar orbit disappeared from every sensor in less than a second. No debris field remained behind. No explosion signatures registered. One moment they existed. The next moment space where they had been became empty. Panic rippled quietly across the bridge. "What weapon does that?" someone whispered. No one answered, because no one knew. Karath stepped toward the central projection table, his massive armored frame towering over the officers around him. "Track the patrol craft." "We cannot." "Find them." "We cannot." Supreme Marshal. For the first time since entering the system, uncertainty crept into the room like cold air. Humanity was not supposed to have this capability. Their broadcast showed chemical rockets, divided governments, primitive orbital stations, outdated warfare doctrines built around kinetic projectiles, and nuclear deterrence. The hegemony had studied Earth for years. Compared to galactic powers, humanity looked fractured, inefficient, and technologically immature. That had been the entire reason for the invasion. Earth was supposed to become an easy victory, a useful resource world, a symbolic conquest. Instead, the fleet now floated blind inside hostile space, while something unseen moved around them. Then another message appeared. This one was different. Not text. A live transmission. An old human man sat alone in a dimly lit room surrounded by paper books instead of data screens. Gray hair. Thin frame. Simple civilian clothing. He looked less like a military leader and more like a university professor moments away from giving a lecture, which somehow made the situation worse. The old man adjusted a pair of ancient eyeglasses and smiled faintly. "Good," he said softly. "Now that you finally understand you cannot leave, perhaps we can begin." No one on the bridge spoke for several seconds after the transmission ended. The old human had not threatened them. That was what unsettled Karath most. Across centuries of conquest, he had learned to recognize desperation in all its forms. Some species had fear behind rage. Others wrapped terror in false dignity and ceremonial speeches about freedom and honor before they died. But that human had shown neither panic nor defiance. He had spoken with the calm patience of a teacher, beginning a lesson already prepared long ago. "Trace the transmission," Karath ordered. "We already attempted it, Supreme Marshal," replied Communications Director Velker, his voice tight. The signal originated from everywhere simultaneously. Karath turned slowly. "Explain." Velker swallowed. "The source propagated through our own communications lattice. The transmission did not penetrate our systems from outside. It emerged from inside the fleet." A murmur spread across the bridge. That should not have been possible. Veydran military networks were isolated during invasions specifically to prevent infiltration. Even allied empires could not access internal relay structures once battle formations activated. Yet somehow humanity had inserted a live broadcast directly into the fleet's secure command architecture without triggering a single alarm. Karath stared at the black screen, still carrying frozen remnants of the old man's face. Humans were primitive. Everything about the intelligence reports confirmed it. Earth remained politically divided. Its nations competed constantly. Their technology lacked coherence. Some regions possessed advanced computing, while others still relied on infrastructure centuries out of date. Their military doctrine appeared fractured between conventional warfare, cyber operations, and obsolete nuclear deterrence strategies. Nothing about them suggested this level of coordination, unless the reports had been designed to suggest exactly that. The thought settled heavily into Karath's mind. Before he could pursue it further, another alarm echoed across the bridge. "Supreme Marshal," a navigator said carefully, "we found the missing patrol craft." Relief moved briefly through the crew. Then the navigator continued. "They are orbiting Earth." Karath frowned. "That is impossible. The patrol formation was stationed near lunar perimeter sectors." "Yes, sir. They moved approximately 300,000 kilometers in under 4 seconds. Silence returned instantly. No known propulsion system could achieve that acceleration without reducing organic crews into liquid. Karath approached the tactical display as fresh data emerged. 32 Veydran patrol vessels now floated silently above Earth's atmosphere in perfect formation. No engine signatures registered. No power fluctuations appeared. The ships simply existed there now, like pieces placed deliberately onto a game board. "Are the crews responding?" he asked. "No. Life signs." Another pause. "Minimal." A cold sensation crept beneath Karath's armored skin. Not dead, not alive enough to matter. Then the human transmission returned without warning. The old man now sat beside a massive window overlooking a city Karath recognized instantly as one of Earth's coastal population centers. Night stretched across the skyline. Civilian lights glittered peacefully beneath drifting clouds. No panic, no evacuation, no riots. The humans knew an invasion fleet surrounded their world, yet the city behind him looked almost calm. That disturbed Karath more than hidden weapons. "You expected fear," the old man said gently, as though continuing a conversation already underway. "That was your first mistake." Karath stepped forward. "Identify yourself." The man smiled faintly. "Professor Elias Vale, Department of Military History, Oxford Global Archive." Several officers exchanged confused looks. "Not a general, not a politician, a historian." "You are not Earth's leader," Karath observed. "No," Elias agreed. "Your empire prepared for soldiers. Humanity sent someone who studies endings instead." Karath felt irritation return. "You speak in riddles while your species faces extinction." "Does it?" The question lingered in the air. Behind Elias, the city lights flickered once. Then every building along the coastline went dark simultaneously, not due to damage, intentionally. Seconds later, thousands of lights reappeared farther inland, creating an entirely different pattern across the continent. Karatha's tactical instincts activated immediately. The city had not lost power. It had moved power, redistribution grids, defensive prioritization. Humanity was preparing for siege conditions while pretending to remain calm. Elias watched recognition spread across the marshal's face. Humans learned long ago that visible strength attracts stronger enemies, he said quietly. So we became very careful about what we allowed the galaxy to see. Karath narrowed his eyes. You claim this was intentional? Oh, entirely. The professor removed a small object from his desk. A paper photograph. Primitive. Physical. Ancient. Karath almost laughed until he saw the image itself. It showed human astronauts standing on their moon beside an old exploration craft. The photograph looked centuries old by galactic standards. Do you know what fascinates me about first contact scenarios? Elias asked. Every advanced civilization assumes technological superiority, guarantees psychological superiority. You all make the same assumption. That primitive species dream of becoming you. And you do not? Elias smiled. No, Supreme Marshal. Humanity spent thousands of years surviving itself. By the time we looked toward the stars, we had already learned the most important lesson in warfare. Karath felt the bridge grow quieter around him. What lesson? That the enemy who appears weak is usually the one trying hardest not to look dangerous. Before Karath could answer, alarms detonated across the bridge again. This time the sound carried real panic. Emergency report from outer fleet sectors. A tactical officer turned pale beneath his gray skin. 3 assault cruisers just opened fire on each other. Karath spun toward the display. The cruisers had broken formation near Saturn orbit. Weapons flared violently across space as Imperial ships exchanged plasma bombardments at point-blank range. What caused this? Karath demanded. No confirmed hostile infiltration. Then why are they attacking Allied vessels? The officer hesitated, then spoke words that changed the atmosphere of the bridge completely. Because, Supreme Marshal, the crews are claiming they received orders from Earth. The battle near Saturn lasted only 4 minutes. That was enough time for 2 Veydran cruisers to cripple each other and for the third to self-destruct after its command crew violently turned against one another inside the bridge chamber. By the time security forces regained control, nearly 11,000 trained personnel were dead without a single human weapon visibly firing. And somehow, that frightened Karath more than open warfare would have, because war made sense. War had rules. This did not. The surviving officers from the damaged cruisers were immediately isolated and interrogated through neural extraction systems. Karath watched the recordings personally from a flagship's war chamber, while senior commanders stood behind him in uneasy silence. Every testimony was identical. The crews claimed they had received direct override orders from High Command authorizing emergency combat protocols against infiltrated Allied vessels. The orders carried legitimate command signatures. The voices sounded authentic. The tactical authorizations were flawless, except High Command had never issued them. That level of infiltration should not exist, Velker muttered quietly. Karath did not answer. His attention remained fixed on the final interrogation recording. A wounded communications officer sat trembling beneath the harsh chamber lights, blood running from one side of his mouth as he struggled to steady his breathing. It wasn't only the orders, the officer whispered. There were messages. The interrogator leaned closer. What messages? The officer's eyes unfocused slightly. Human voices. A silence settled across the war chamber. They spoke to us through private channels, he continued weakly. Not threats, not propaganda. They knew names, families, histories. They spoke to soldiers from conquered species in their native languages. They knew things no outsider should know. Karath's expression darkened. The Veydran military incorporated hundreds of conquered civilizations into auxiliary fleets. It was efficient, economical, standard imperial doctrine across the galaxy. But suddenly that doctrine no longer looked efficient. It looked vulnerable. The recording ended abruptly as the officer suffered total neural collapse. No further information could be extracted. Karath turned slowly toward his command staff. How much of the fleet composition comes from annexed species? No one answered immediately. Finally, Tactical Director Sarek cleared his throat carefully. Approximately 41%, Supreme Marshal. The number struck the room like a physical impact. 41%. Nearly half the invasion fleet consisted of species conquered by the hegemony over centuries of expansion. Species forced into military service. Species taught obedience through overwhelming technological superiority and fear. Fear that suddenly seemed less stable than before. Karath moved toward the massive star map dominating the chamber wall. Earth glowed calmly at the center of the projection. Small, blue, silent, and somehow controlling the psychological atmosphere of an entire Imperial fleet without firing a shot. How? Velker finally asked aloud. How could humans possibly know enough about internal fleet personnel to target them individually? No one answered. Then the chamber lights dimmed again. Not fully, just enough. A soft distortion rippled across the central projection table before Professor Elias Vale appeared once more. This time he was not sitting peacefully inside his office. He stood inside what looked like an enormous underground archive stretching endlessly behind him, rows of physical shelves vanishing into darkness. Karath immediately noticed something strange. The archive did not contain only human records. Alien symbols covered thousands of storage containers, languages from conquered worlds, species classifications, military insignias. The realization hit him instantly. These are Imperial records, Karath said. Elias nodded almost proudly. Some of them. That information is classified beyond planetary clearance levels. Yes, Elias agreed softly, which raised fascinating questions about why abandoned colonies kept transmitting fragments of your history into deep space. Karath felt cold anger building now. You infiltrated conquered worlds. No, Elias corrected. We listened to them. The distinction unsettled him more than he expected. The professor walked slowly between the shelves as he spoke, occasionally brushing his fingers against containers marked with alien scripts. You see, conquest is an ending, Elias said. Humanity sees it differently. Every empire in history leaves survivors behind. Survivors remember things. Survivors hide things. Survivors whisper. He stopped beside one shelf and removed a small metallic object, an Imperial military insignia. Veydran. Old. Very old. Karath recognized the symbol immediately. His breathing slowed. That campaign was erased from public archives. He said carefully. Yes, Elias replied. The Orion Rift purges. 283 years ago. Officially described as a containment operation against piracy. Karath's jaw tightened. No living outsider should know that name. The Orion campaigns were among the Empire's deepest sealed records. Entire sectors had been exterminated after rebellions threatened core supply routes. Even senior military officers lacked full access to those events. Yet the human historian held physical artifacts from the conflict in his hand. How? Karath asked quietly. Elias smiled faintly. Because your empire never understood the difference between defeating civilizations and silencing them. The room remained utterly still. You think technology creates power, the professor continued. Humans learned something different long ago. Information survives longer than armies. Stories survive longer than governments. Memory survives longer than fear. He stepped closer toward the transmission lens. And your empire left memories everywhere. Karath studied him carefully now. Not a diplomat, not a propagandist, a historian. For the first time, Karath understood why Earth had sent him. Generals threatened fleets. Historians threatened empires. Then Elias said something that made several officers visibly tense. You still believe this invasion began 3 days ago, he said softly. That was your second mistake. Karath narrowed his eyes. Explain. Elias looked almost sympathetic. This war began the moment humanity realized intelligent life probably behaves exactly like humans once did. A heavy silence followed. Then the professor activated another projection. Thousands of signals appeared across the star map surrounding Earth. Not warships, not weapons, human probes, ancient ones, some drifting dead beyond Pluto, others hidden inside asteroid belts, a few buried on moons throughout the outer system. Karath stared at the timestamps beside them. Some had been placed decades earlier, others centuries. The oldest dated back to humanity's earliest space age. His stomach tightened. "You were preparing for invasion before achieving interstellar travel," he said slowly. Elias nodded. "Of course we were." Then his expression changed slightly. Not triumph, not arrogance, something colder. "And Supreme Marshal," he said quietly, "you still have not asked the question that should terrify you most." Karath felt unease crawl beneath his armor. "What question?" Elias looked directly into him. "If humanity could do all this before reaching the stars..." The old man paused. "What exactly do you think we've been building since?" For the next 11 minutes, no one inside the Dominion Spear spoke above a whisper. The bridge no longer resembled the command center of a conquering armada. It felt like the interior of a damaged vessel drifting too close to a black hole. Every officer quietly aware that something massive and invisible was pulling them somewhere irreversible. Karath stood motionless near the central projection table, while fresh reports flooded in from across the fleet. Minor insurrections, refusal of command compliance, unauthorized communications between auxiliary crews, weapon systems temporarily locked by internal sabotage. At first glance, the incident seemed isolated. Then patterns emerged. Almost every disruption originated among personnel from annexed civilizations. Humanity was not attacking the fleet directly. They were peeling pressure points apart, one nerve at a time. "Supreme Marshal," Velker said carefully, "we intercepted another transmission burst." "Source, that is the problem." Karath turned toward him slowly. "There is no centralized source. The signal fragments are bouncing through civilian channels, abandoned satellites, encrypted cargo frequencies, entertainment broadcasts, even outdated mining relays. That should be impossible." "Yes, sir." Velker hesitated before continuing. "And the content is spreading." The tactical display shifted. A stream of intercepted footage appeared across the chamber wall. Karath expected propaganda. He expected fabricated atrocities or emotional manipulation designed to destabilize morale. Instead, he saw records. Real ones. Footage from conquered worlds. Cities burning beneath orbital bombardments. Civilian evacuations interrupted by Veydran purge operations. Mass graves hidden beneath collapsed industrial zones. Children from annexed species staring into cameras while military transports descended overhead. Every clip carried exact timestamps, verified coordinates, official military authorization codes. Silence swallowed the bridge again. No one questioned the authenticity, because every senior officer recognized classified operations buried deep inside Imperial archives. "How do they possess this?" one commander whispered. No answer came. The footage continued. An elderly alien woman appeared on screen speaking in a trembling voice translated automatically into Imperial Standard. "They told us resistance was pointless," she said softly. "Then they erased our history, so our children would never remember we fought at all." Another clip followed immediately after. A former Imperial governor giving testimony before execution. "We pacified the world in 11 days. Total population reduction exceeded projections by 40%. Native cultural memory expected to collapse within 2 generations. More footage, more records, more truths." Karath felt something unfamiliar spreading through the room. Not fear, shame. It infected the atmosphere slowly, poisoning the certainty that it sustained the hegemony for centuries. Officers avoided eye contact. Auxiliary crew members stationed along the bridge perimeter stared at the floor in silence, because many of them came from conquered bloodlines, and now humanity was showing them exactly what had been done to their worlds. The brilliance of it hit Karath all at once. Humans were not using information as a weapon. They were using memory. A sharp alarm interrupted the realization. "Emergency priority report from outer fleet sectors." Karath turned instantly. A communications officer looked visibly shaken. 3 auxiliary battalions are refusing movement orders. On whose authority? They claim Earth contacted them directly. Rage flashed briefly through Karatha's chest. Through what channel? The officer swallowed hard. Personal devices, sir. The bridge fell silent again. Personal devices, not military systems. Humanity was bypassing command structures entirely and speaking directly to individual soldiers across the fleet, which meant this was never about hacking technology. It was about understanding people. Karath suddenly remembered something Elias Vale had said earlier, survivor's whisper. The realization struck with horrifying clarity. Earth had not spent decades studying Imperial warships. Earth had spent decades studying conquered species, their languages, their histories, their grief. Humanity understood the emotional fault lines of the Empire better than the Empire itself. Then another transmission appeared. This time Elias stood beside a massive holographic star map displaying hundreds of Imperial systems. Red markers spread slowly across occupied territories. Karath immediately recognized what they represented. Rebellion probability zones. You should know, Elias said calmly, we have not released the archive yet. A chill moved through the chamber. What you are seeing now is only verification material, enough to prove authenticity before wider distribution begins. Karath narrowed his eyes. You're threatening civil collapse. No, Elias replied softly. Your empire threatened itself the moment it built power on erase histories. The red markers expanded further across the projection. Entire sectors glowed now. Industrial worlds, military manufacturing hubs, resource colonies, strategically vital systems populated by species conquered generations ago. Karath understood military mathematics instantly. If even a fraction rebelled simultaneously, the empire would fracture. Supply chains would collapse first, then communications, then border stability. The hegemony could survive a war. It could not survive internal doubt spreading across thousands of systems at once. You would ignite the galaxy, Karath said quietly. Elias looked directly into the transmission lens. No, Supreme Marshal. Humanity would simply stop preventing the fire from spreading. The words settled heavily into the room, because that implied something even worse. Earth had already been containing this information. For how long? Karath found himself asking the question before he could stop it. How much do you actually know about the hegemony? Elias smiled faintly. Then every light inside the bridge dimmed. New projections appeared around the chamber walls automatically. Not human symbols. Imperial ones. Restricted military campaigns. Secret annexation routes. Political assassinations disguised as insurgencies. Black site prison coordinates. Records so classified that only the ruling sectors of the Empire possessed access. Several officers physically recoiled. One commander whispered a curse under his breath. Karath felt something cold settle into his stomach. This was impossible. No external civilization should possess this level of infiltration, unless... His thoughts stopped abruptly. Unless humanity had not infiltrated the Empire recently. Unless they had been doing it for decades. Elias seemed to read the realization forming across the Marshal's face. You assumed humans were primitive because we lacked faster-than-light travel, he said quietly. That was your third mistake. The old historian stepped closer toward the camera. You forgot that civilizations do not need to travel far to become dangerous. Sometimes they only need time. Karath stared at him in silence, and for the first time since entering Earth's system, he began to suspect the invasion fleet was not trapped by weapons. It was trapped by preparation. Then another alert detonated across the bridge. But this time the panic in the officer's voice sounded different. Not confused. Terrified. Supreme Marshal, we just detected unauthorized broadcasts spreading inside the core worlds. The room froze. Karath's eyes widened slightly. The core worlds were not near Earth. They were deep inside Imperial territory. Thousands of light years away, which meant only one thing. Humanity had already reached them long before the invasion began. The war chamber emptied within minutes, not because Karath ordered it, because the officers could no longer hide what was spreading across their faces. For the first time in recorded Imperial history, Senior Veydran commanders looked uncertain inside their own flagship. Some left in silence. Others rushed toward secure communication stations to contact distant sectors. A few simply stood frozen before eventually walking away without speaking at all. Only the highest-ranking personnel remained behind as emergency transmissions flooded in from the core worlds. Karaf listened carefully to the reports arriving from systems thousands of light-years away. Civil unrest on Annex colonies. Military recruitment centers attacked. Public data towers hijacked by anonymous broadcasts. Workers abandoning planetary factories after receiving archived footage of imperial purges. Entire populations demanding answers about erase wars they had never been taught existed. And somehow, impossibly, every transmission carried the same signature. Earth, not Earth's military, not Earth's governments. Humanity itself. The realization disturbed Karaf more than any hidden superweapon could have, because governments could be defeated, armies could be destroyed, but civilizations that moved as one unified psychological force were something else entirely. Velker stepped forward, visibly pale beneath the bridge lights. Supreme Marshal, we recovered the source architecture behind the broadcasts. Karaf looked toward him sharply. Explain. It is not centralized. I know that already. No, sir, Velker said carefully. You do not understand. The communications director activated a holographic projection above the tactical table. At first it appeared chaotic. Thousands of tiny signal routes spread across the galaxy like glowing veins. Old satellites, civilian networks, cargo relays, entertainment systems, mining drones, archaeological probes, medical supply ships. Nothing military, nothing obvious. And that was exactly the horror of it. Earth had built the largest covert communications web Karaf had ever seen, entirely out of ignored infrastructure. It is adaptive, Velker whispered. The network rewrites itself constantly. If we shut down one path, the information reroutes through 20 more. Karaf stared at the projection. How long would it take to fully suppress? Velker hesitated, then answered honestly. We cannot. Silence settled over the chamber. Not because the statement sounded dramatic, because everyone present knew Velker never exaggerated tactical realities. The network was alive, not artificial intelligence, not automation, human coordination, billions of tiny systems quietly woven together over decades until the structure became impossible to destroy without dismantling civilization itself. Humanity had hidden its greatest weapon inside ordinary life. Then the bridge lights shifted again. Professor Elias Vale appeared once more. This time, however, he was not alone. Several figures stood behind him in the shadows of the archive chamber. Alien figures, different species, different worlds. Some wore remnants of military uniforms. Others looked civilian. One appeared ancient enough to barely stand. Karaf felt the atmosphere on the bridge tighten immediately. The old historian folded his hands calmly behind his back. You should understand something important, Supreme Marshal, Elias said softly. Earth never intended to fight this war alone. Karaf narrowed his eyes. Those are insurgents. A faint smile crossed Elias's face. No, they are witnesses. One of the figures stepped forward. Karaf recognized the species instantly. Thalnari, conquered 112 years earlier after a 12-day orbital campaign. Imperial records classified the surviving population as fully pacified. The elderly Thalnari woman looked directly into the transmission lens. You burned our oceans, she said quietly. Then you told our children we surrendered willingly. No one on the bridge moved. Another figure stepped forward. A dress-guy male wearing fragments of industrial worker markings. You executed our scholars first, he said, because you feared memory more than weapons. Then another. Each testimony struck harder than the last because none sounded rehearsed. There was no rage in their voices, no propaganda, only exhausted truth. Karaf suddenly understood the scale of what humanity had done. Earth had not spent decades building allies. Earth had spent decades collecting survivors. The distinction changed everything. They cannot threaten hegemony One Veydran officer snapped suddenly, desperate for certainty. Scattered refugees and dead civilizations do not overthrow empires. Elias looked at him almost sadly. No, he agreed, but stories do. The chamber fell silent again. Then Elias activated another projection. At first, Karath thought he was seeing military deployment patterns. He was wrong. The map displayed emotional response metrics spreading through imperial space. Fear, anger, collective identity resurgence, rebellion probability, hope. Entire occupied systems were awakening psychologically in real time, not because Earth gave them weapons, because Earth gave them proof they had not imagined the atrocities done to them. Humanity had weaponized validation. Karath felt genuine dread grip him for the first time. Not fear of defeat, fear of irreversible change. Because once populations remembered who they used to be, empires weakened. Then came the moment that shattered the last fragments of certainty inside the room. A priority transmission interrupted the archive feed. An emergency signal from the destroyer Vigilant Crown Station near Neptune orbit. The bridge officer activated immediately. Static filled the chamber. Then screaming. Alien voices shouted over one another in panic, while warning alarms blared in the background. They're inside the ship. What do you mean inside? They are everywhere. Karath stepped forward sharply. Report. The surviving officer on screen looked half insane with terror. No human vessels detected, he gasped. No boarding signatures. No breach alarms. But the crew. He stopped breathing for a moment, then whispered words that froze the chamber. They stopped obeying. Karath's eyes narrowed dangerously. What happened? The officers swallowed hard. They started receiving transmissions from Earth. Personal ones. Messages from conquered worlds. Names of family members lost during annexations. Records hidden by the Empire. Histories erased from public archives. His voice trembled. They are turning on each other because they no longer know which orders are lies. The transmission dissolved into static again. No one spoke afterward, because the truth had finally become unavoidable. Humanity's real weapon was not hidden fleets, not impossible technology, not secret superweapons. It was understanding. Humans had looked at the galaxy's greatest empire and realized something astonishingly simple. Every civilization conquered by fear eventually becomes a prison full of silent resentment. And Earth had just unlocked every cell at once. Then Elias delivered the sentence Karath would remember for the rest of his life. You still think this is an invasion, the historian said softly. The old man's eyes seemed colder now. It isn't. Karath stared at him. Then what is it? Elias smiled faintly. This is the moment your empire discovers humanity was never preparing to survive conquest. The room went completely silent. We were preparing to end conquerors. The countdown began 17 minutes later. No announcement preceded it. No dramatic warning echoed across the fleet. One moment the invasion armada drifted in fractured silence above Earth, and the next every screen aboard every Veydran vessel displayed the same image. 59:59. The numbers began falling immediately. Karath stared at the timer, without speaking. What is it connected to? Velker asked quietly. No one answered, because nobody knew. That uncertainty infected the fleet faster than panic ever could. Reports poured into the flagship by the second. Auxiliary crews refusing combat authorization. Supply vessels abandoning formation. Encrypted military forums overwhelmed with leaked archive footage. Entire occupied populations across distant sectors flooding planetary communication. Grids demanding explanations from local governors. And worst of all, Imperial soldiers were beginning to hesitate. Not all of them. Not yet, but enough. Karath recognized the signs instantly because hesitation was how empires started bleeding. A species could survive military defeat. What it could not survive was losing faith in the inevitability of its own power. Supreme Marshal Sarek said carefully, combat readiness has fallen below acceptable engagement thresholds in 27% of the fleet. Karath turned slowly. Why? The tactical director hesitated, then spoke the truth no one wanted aloud. Crews are questioning command legitimacy. The words settled into the chamber like poison. Legitimacy, not strategy, not firepower. Humanity had somehow shifted the battlefield away from military superiority entirely. The hegemony still possessed overwhelming technological dominance. Their weapons remained stronger. Their ships remained faster. But soldiers who doubted their empire no longer fought like conquerors. And humans clearly understood that better than anyone. The timer continued falling. 52:14, 52:13, 52:12. What happens at 0? One officer whispered. No one answered him. Not because they lacked theories. Because every theory sounded catastrophic. Karath moved toward the Central Command platform as another emergency report appeared overhead. Priority alert from the core systems. The transmission activated automatically. An Imperial governor appeared on screen surrounded by chaos. Sirens echoed behind him while crowds surged to the streets outside government barricades. Supreme Marshal, the governor said breathlessly, the archive leaks have spread beyond containment. Demonstrations are erupting across multiple sectors. Several military academies have openly refused loyalty verification. Karath's expression hardened. Restore order. We are trying. The governor looked terrified now. They know too much. The broadcast contained classified purge records, execution authorizations, erased planetary casualty numbers. His voice faltered, and they're authentic. The transmission ended abruptly as explosions thundered somewhere off-screen. Silence swallowed the bridge again. Karath realized something horrifying in that moment. Earth had attacked the Empire's emotional infrastructure, not its fleets, not its borders, its belief systems. The hegemony survived because conquered worlds believed resistance was hopeless. The Empire's myth of inevitability mattered more than its weapons ever had. Now humanity was dismantling that myth piece by piece in front of the entire galaxy. Another transmission appeared instantly afterward. Professor Elias Vale stood calmly inside the archive chamber while the countdown continued above his head. 49:03. You should withdraw, Elias said softly. Karath narrowed his eyes. You speak as though this outcome is already decided. It is... The certainty in the old man's voice unsettled the room more than shouting ever could. You overestimate your position, Karath replied coldly. The hegemony still possesses enough firepower to sterilize your planet. Elias nodded gently. Yes. No fear, no hesitation, just agreement. That response disturbed Karath more than defiance would have. You think humans fear extinction because we value survival above principle. Elias continued quietly. That assumption only works against civilizations raised in comfort. The old historian stepped closer toward the transmission lens. Humanity was raised in conflict. Behind him, the archive walls shifted into new projections. Ancient human wars, burning cities, world conflicts, nuclear detonations, economic collapses, pandemics, civil unrest, generations of violence layered across centuries of history. You studied our technology, Elias said, but you never studied what built us psychologically. The images change faster now. Human rescue workers entering radioactive zones, civilians rebuilding cities after destruction, astronauts launching into space atop controlled explosions, doctors working through plague outbreaks, soldiers carrying wounded strangers through burning streets. We survived ourselves first, Elias whispered. Karath felt the atmosphere on the bridge tighten. Do you understand what that means? No one answered. Elias did not wait. It means humanity stopped believing fear guaranteed surrender a very long time ago. The timer continued falling. 44:21, 44:20, 44:19. Then another emergency alarm detonated across the flagship. Supreme Marshal, a communications officer stumbled forward, visibly shaking. We intercepted unauthorized transmissions inside fleet command channels. Karath's patience snapped slightly. From Earth? No, sir. The officer swallowed hard. From our own crews. The tactical display exploded with new signals. Messages spreading ship to ship across the Armada. Auxiliary personnel demanding access to sealed historical records. Conquered species officers refusing deployment compliance. Entire engineering divisions threatening shutdowns unless archive authenticity was publicly denied. But the Empire could not deny it, because the records were real. That was the true genius of humanity's attack. Earth was not creating rebellion. It was removing the barriers preventing existing resentment from connecting. The timer reached 40:00 exactly, and suddenly changed color. Red. Every screen across the fleet darkened, except for one message now displayed beneath the countdown. Phase 2 preparing. Karath felt something cold move through his chest. What is Phase 2? Sarek whispered. No one answered. Then the bridge lighting flickered once. Just once. But when illumination stabilized again, every auxiliary crew member station on the command deck was gone. No alarms triggered. No doors opened. No security alerts activated. They had simply left their posts simultaneously. Karath stared toward the empty stations in silence. Then another transmission arrived, not from Earth, from inside the fleet itself. A voice spoke calmly across every command channel, translated automatically into hundreds of languages. We know the truth now. The speaker paused, and Karath immediately recognized the accent, one of their own officers. We will not help you erase another world. The fleet began fracturing 43 minutes before the countdown reached 0. Not collapsing, not retreating. Fracturing. Karath watched it happen in real time across the tactical projection surrounding the bridge chamber. Entire formations drifted subtly out of alignment as auxiliary crews refused synchronization orders. Escort destroyers stopped responding to carrier commands. Supply vessels rerouted themselves toward neutral coordinates without authorization. Thousands of tiny acts of hesitation spread through the armada like cracks forming beneath ice. And all of it happened without humanity firing a single visible shot. Contain the communication channels. Karath ordered sharply. We are trying, Velker answered. The fleet network is no longer centralized. Karath turned toward him slowly. What does that mean? The communications director looked exhausted now. It means personnel are bypassing command architecture entirely. They are using civilian frequencies, maintenance relays, personal interfaces, anything capable of transmitting data. Another officer interrupted urgently. Supreme Marshal, we just lost tactical coordination with 7 Annex battalions near Mars orbit. Destroyed. No. The officer hesitated. They declared neutrality. Silence. Pure, impossible silence. Neutrality. Inside an active Imperial invasion fleet. Karath felt something deep inside him tighten painfully. This was no longer mutiny. Mutiny implied rebellion against authority. This was worse. This was disbelief. The Empire's soldiers were beginning to stop believing the Empire deserved obedience at all. The timer continued its relentless descent above every screen. 31:08. 31:07, 31:06. Then the bridge lighting dimmed again. Not because Elias Vale forced another transmission, because the flagship itself surrendered control. Every console locked simultaneously as a new image flooded the chamber walls. Karath froze, not from fear, from recognition. His homeworld, the capital oceans of Veydran Prime, stretched across the displays in breathtaking clarity. Towering cities of silver and black rose beside vast coastal regions glowing beneath starlight. For one brief second, confusion rippled across the bridge. Then came the next image. Bodies, burned settlements, collapsed districts hidden far beneath the capital sectors, secret military executions, civilians lined against walls beneath imperial banners. Karath's blood went cold. No! Someone whispered behind him. The footage continued. Ancient internal purges. Political disappearances. Entire colonial populations sacrificed during early imperial expansion to preserve resource stability inside the core worlds. Records buried so deeply inside classified archives that Karath himself had never seen some of them. Yet humanity had them. Every officer on the bridge stood frozen now, because suddenly this was no longer about conquered species learning forbidden truths. Now the Empire itself was learning truths it had hidden from its own people. Professor Elias Vale appeared slowly at the center of the projection. But this time his expression held no trace of warmth, only exhaustion. "You misunderstand humanity entirely," he said softly. Karath stared at him in silence. "You thought we were defending Earth." The historian looked almost disappointed. "We moved beyond that months ago." Karath's voice emerged low and dangerous. "What have you done?" Elias folded his hands behind his back. "We studied your empire." Images continued flashing around the chamber. Political assassinations, manufactured famines, false flag attacks blamed on rebel worlds, evidence of entire wars engineered to justify expansion. Karath felt the room changing around him, not emotionally, structurally, because the officers surrounding him were no longer looking only at the screens. They were looking at each other. Trust was dying in real time. "You built the hegemony on selective memory," Elias continued quietly. "Conquered species were not your only victims. Your own citizens inherited edited history designed to preserve obedience." Karath felt something dangerous stirring beneath the bridge atmosphere now. Not panic, betrayal. And betrayal was infinitely harder to control. The timer dropped lower. 25:44, 25:43, 25:42. Then another transmission burst, struck the fleet. This one bypassed all command restrictions instantly. Millions of voices flooded communication systems simultaneously. Citizens from conquered worlds, imperial civilians, soldiers, governors, workers, survivors. Questions exploded across every frequency. Were the archive records authentic? How many worlds were erased? What happened in the Rift campaigns? Who authorized the purges? Why were civilian casualties hidden? The Empire was drowning in its own secrecy. Karath finally understood the true scale of humanity's preparation. Earth had not merely gathered intelligence. Humanity had mapped the psychological pressure points of an interstellar civilization with terrifying precision, and now they were pressing every fracture at once. One of the Veydran officers suddenly stepped away from his station. Karath noticed immediately. Commander Relis, 30 years of decorated service, born on an annexed border colony. Relis removed the imperial insignia from his chest slowly and placed it on the command console. No one moved. No one stopped him. "I lost family during the Talvaran pacification," Relis said quietly. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "The archives say the operation targeted insurgents." He looked toward Karath directly. "The footage of civilians." Karath held his gaze. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Relis stepped backward. Not hostile, not violent, just done. Others began following, one by one, not abandoning the bridge physically, abandoning it emotionally. The Empire's authority was evaporating faster than military discipline could replace it. The timer fell beneath 20 minutes, and suddenly another message appeared beneath it. "Final release ready." Karath's stomach tightened. "What is the final release?" Sarek whispered. Elias answered immediately. "The complete archive." The old historian's eyes seemed impossibly tired now. Every classified war crime, every erased rebellion, every hidden purge, every falsified conquest. Karath stepped forward sharply. "You would destroy galactic civilization." "No," Elias replied softly. His voice carried genuine sadness now. "Your empire did at the moment it decided truth was more dangerous than cruelty." The room fell silent again. Then Elias delivered the sentence that finally shattered whatever certainty remained inside the flagship. "If the release transmits," he said quietly, "the hegemony will not survive the next year." Karath felt the weight of those words settle over every officer present, because they all understood something horrifying at the exact same moment. Humanity was not threatening military defeat anymore. Humanity was threatening historical extinction. Then the timer reached exactly 15 minutes remaining, and Earth finally revealed its last weapon. Not fleets, not bombs, not hidden technology. A list. Names began appearing across every screen aboard the invasion armada. Imperial officials, governors, admirals, politicians, thousands of them. Beside each name was a single classification. Complicit. Karath stared at the expanding list in silence. Then his own name appeared near the top. Karath did not react when his name appeared on the screen. Around him, others did. Several officers staggered backward in shock. One commander immediately began shouting denials at nobody in particular. Another simply stared at his own reflection in the black glass of the tactical console, as if seeing himself clearly for the first time. But Karath remained still, because in that moment, something terrible finally became undeniable. Humanity had already won. Not politically, not militarily. Conceptually, the hegemony's greatest strength had never been fleets or weapons. It had been certainty, the absolute belief that imperial authority represented order itself. That conquest was inevitable. That resistance eventually collapsed beneath overwhelming force. Now that certainty lay bleeding across every communication network in the galaxy, and no amount of firepower could rebuild it quickly enough. The countdown continued. 9:14, 9:13, 9:12. Karath slowly approached the central command platform, while reports flooded the chamber faster than officers could process them. Core world demonstrations escalating into riots. Multiple governors requesting emergency extraction. 3 annex fleets openly defecting from Imperial command. Civilian populations demanding full archive disclosure. Military officers refusing planetary bombardment authorization without independent verification of classified records. The Empire was not dying because humanity attacked it. It was dying because humanity forced it to look at itself. Karath finally understood why Earth had sent a historian instead of a soldier. Because wars ended eventually. But rewritten memory poisoned civilization for generations. Professor Elias Vale appeared once more at the center of the bridge projection. No dramatic lighting. No triumph. Just an exhausted old man standing inside an archive filled with ghosts. The countdown hovered above him. 8:01. Karath stared directly into the transmission. What happens if the timer reaches 0? Elias answered without hesitation. The full archive transmits automatically across every inhabited system connected to Imperial infrastructure. And if we withdraw? The old historian remained silent for several seconds. Then he said something that surprised everyone on the bridge. Then humanity lets a galaxy decide what comes next on its own. Karath narrowed his eyes slightly. You would stop. Elias gave a faint, weary smile. No, Supreme Marshal. We would simply stop accelerating the collapse. The honesty of the answer struck harder than any threat could have, because it sounded true. Humanity did not want extermination. They wanted deterrence, not domination. Warning. Karath looked around the bridge one final time. The invasion fleet was finished. Even if they burned Earth now, the Empire would fracture afterward anyway. The archive had already spread too far. Doubt had already rooted itself too deeply. Every conquered world now knew resistance had never truly died. And perhaps worst of all, the galaxy now knew the hegemony could bleed. Karath had spent his entire life believing fear maintained peace. Humans believe something else entirely. Truth. Dangerous. Uncontrollable truth. The countdown reached 6 minutes. Behind Karath, Commander Rella spoke quietly. You should end this. Karath did not turn around. More voices followed. Not rebellious. Not hostile. Only tired. We cannot fight the entire galaxy forever. They will never obey us the same way again. The archive is already everywhere. Karath closed his eyes briefly. For the first time in decades, he thought not as a conqueror, but as a survivor. And survivors understood when battles became extinction traps. The Supreme Marshal stepped toward the fleet-wide communications console. Every officer on the bridge watched in silence. Across the solar system, thousands of Imperial vessels waited unknowingly for the next order. Attack, retreat, civil war. History balanced on a single decision. Karath activated the transmission channel. His voice spread instantly across the entire armada. This is Supreme Marshal Karath of the Veydran Hegemony. Even the bridge itself seemed to hold its breath. All combat operations against Earth are terminated immediately. Shock rippled visibly through nearby officers despite the inevitability of the decision. Karath continued calmly. The invasion fleet will withdraw from human space under full ceasefire conditions. No planetary bombardments. No retaliatory strikes. No further escalation. The countdown continued falling. 422, 421, 420. Karath looked directly toward Elias Vale. In exchange, he said carefully, humanity ceases active archive deployment against civilian infrastructure. The old historian studied him for several seconds. Then, slowly, he nodded. The countdown stopped. Every screen aboard the fleet froze instantly. 419. Silence consumed the bridge. Not relieved silence. Not victorious silence. The silence of an age ending. Karath exhaled slowly for what felt like the first time in hours. Then Elias spoke one final time. You know what frightens your empire most, Supreme Marshal? Karath said nothing. The historian's tired eyes softened slightly. It was never humanity's weapons. Behind him, endless shelves of preserved memories stretched into darkness. It was the realization that ordinary people stopped kneeling the moment they discovered they were never alone. No one on the bridge moved, because deep down, every officer understood the truth of it. Humanity had not conquered the hegemony through superior technology. Humanity had done something far more dangerous. They had reminded the galaxy how to remember. Elias reached forward calmly and closed the transmission. The screens went dark. For several long seconds, the only visible thing on the flagship bridge was a frozen countdown. 419. A timer permanently halted 4 minutes before the collapse of an empire. Far below, Earth rotated peacefully beneath the stars. Small, silent, untouched, and somewhere across the galaxy, on world hegemony once believed broken forever, billions of people were hearing forbidden truths for the very first time. Not because humanity gave them victory, because humanity gave them something stronger. Permission to rise.